The chamber was built to make laughter echo. It curved like the inside of a hollowed star, tiers of levitating thrones stacked in arrogant symmetry, each seat tailored to a species that had conquered something worth bragging about. Light poured in from a fractured ceiling of transparent alloy, refracted through nebulae held captive in orbit, painting the hall in regal blues and predatory golds. This was the laughing court of stars, where wars were discussed the way gamblers discussed odds, and today the sound of amusement rolled freely, unchallenged. At the center, the Galactic Empire's king reclined with theatrical ease. His crown was not worn so much as displayed, a lattice of living metal that responded to his mood, flaring brighter with every mocking chuckle. He had just finished recounting the brief, embarrassing end of a border species that had mistaken patience for mercy. The story ended, as all his favorites did, with silence from the defeated and applause from the powerful. "And now," the king said, voice smooth with certainty, "we come to humanity." The word itself seemed to amuse the room. A ripple of clicking mandibles, hissing breaths, harmonic hums. Screens flared to life, projecting images of Earth's cities, its arguments, its messy democracies and endless debates. A civilization that voted while others mobilized. "They talk," the king continued, stretching the word as if tasting it. "They argue. They hesitate. They fear war so deeply they try to explain it away." More laughter, sharper this time. The human representative did not move. She stood alone on the polished obsidian floor, boots planted with ceremonial precision, hands folded loosely behind her back. Her uniform was unadorned by galactic standards. Dark fabric, clean lines, a few small insignia whose meaning only humans seemed to care about. Her hair was pulled back, severe but practical, and her expression was attentive in the way of someone listening to a briefing rather than an insult. Her name, rank and history had been announced earlier, but the court had already forgotten them. She was simply the human woman general now, a curiosity, an exhibit. "You see," the king said, gesturing lazily toward her. "Not even offended. That is fear." She smiled. It was not wide or performative. It was the polite smile of a professional acknowledging a superior's misunderstanding and deciding, silently, whether correcting it was worth the effort. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice calm and measured, translated instantly into a dozen alien frequencies. "Thank you for the introduction. It was thorough." A few nobles snorted. One of the insectoid strategists tilted its head, compound eyes narrowing in interest. The king waved a dismissive claw. "You are welcome to deny it. Many have tried." "I wouldn't dream of denying your experience," she replied. "I'd only suggest that you may be mislabeling the behavior." "Oh." The king leaned forward, amused. "Then enlighten us." She glanced around the chamber, not nervously, but as if taking attendance. She noted the armored warlords leaning eagerly on their armrests, the merchant princes calculating margins behind still faces, the ancient observers who had stopped laughing altogether. Then she looked back to the king. "Humans do not fear war," she said gently. "We fear inefficiency." The word hung there, oddly unthreatening. A translator lagged, recalibrated, and tried again. Laughter erupted, louder than before. "Listen to her," the king roared, delighted. "They fear paperwork." More amusement. A crystalline noble chimed mockingly. A reptilian commander wiped a tear of mirth from one scaled eye. The general waited. Humans, after all, were very good at waiting. "When we argue," she continued, unbothered by the noise, "it is because we are deciding who is responsible afterward. When we hesitate, it is because we are choosing the least expensive way to win. War, for us, is not passion. It is logistics." That earned her a few confused glances. Not concern. "Not yet." The king reclined again. "You speak as if you have won many." "We have survived many," she corrected. "Winning is just the paperwork that follows." A murmur moved through the chamber. The ancient tactician species exchanged subtle color shifts, a private language of caution. The merchants stopped calculating and began listening. "And yet," the king said, voice sharpening slightly, "you are here without fleets, without weapons. Without defiance. She inclined her head. We were invited. A ripple of irritation crossed the king's crown. Do not mistake courtesy for safety. I wouldn't, she said. Humans learned that lesson early. Screens flared again, unprompted. For a moment, everyone assumed it was another display meant to humiliate her species. Instead, charts appeared. Timelines. Flow diagrams that meant nothing at first glance. What is this? Demanded a warlord. Context, the general replied. You see us as talkers because you only observe the part where we speak. You do not stay for the part where we decide. The king laughed once more, but it was shorter this time. And what do you decide, General? She met his gaze fully now. The smile faded, replaced by something quieter and more focused. We decide whether something is worth ending quickly, she said, or slowly. Silence crept in at the edges of the chamber, unnoticed at first, like a shadow stretching at dusk. The king straightened. Are you threatening the Empire? She shook her head. No, Your Majesty. I'm clarifying a misconception. The screens shifted again. Supply routes blinked into view. Trade corridors. Dependencies. The laughter had stopped entirely now, replaced by an uneasy stillness. You called this court the laughing court of stars, she said softly. On Earth, we have a saying. We laugh when we're nervous too. Somewhere, deep within the chamber's systems, an alert chimed. Then another. The general folded her hands in front of her, posture unchanged. May I ask, she said, tone still polite, how long your empire can function without its outer logistics nodes? The king did not answer immediately. For the first time since her arrival, the human woman general was no longer the smallest presence in the room, and as the screens continued to update behind her, the court began to realize that the laughter had not been for her at all. The silence that followed her question did not shatter. It stretched. The laughing court of stars had always thrived on noise, on the ritual clamor of dominance, but now the absence of sound pressed against every mind in the chamber. The king did not answer her immediately, and in that pause the human woman general learned something useful. He was not confused. He was calculating how much certainty he could afford to lose. Around them, the screens continued to glow, steady and patient, displaying nothing overtly violent. No explosions. No fleets. Just numbers, routes, timelines. The language of consequences. You presume much, the king finally said, his voice smooth again, carefully moderated. Empires do not fall because of missing shipments. No, she agreed pleasantly. They fall because everyone assumes someone else will fix the missing shipments. A few of the merchant princes shifted. One clicked its mandibles in a staccato pattern that signaled unease. Trade was their blood, and blood loss was not something to joke about. You see weakness where there is none, a reptilian warlord growled, rising slightly from its throne. Its armor glimmered with trophies taken from extinct worlds. We have survived shortages before. I'm sure you have, the general replied, her tone respectful. Humans survive them too. We just tend to remember who caused them. The warlord bared its teeth, but the king raised a claw, silencing him. His gaze never left the human. You are very confident for someone standing alone, he observed. She smiled again, smaller this time. I'm not alone. I'm just the only one you can see. That earned a ripple of low murmurs. Several ancient observers leaned forward, their long memories stirring. They had heard that kind of sentence before, spoken by civilizations moments before everything changed. You came here, the king said slowly, to lecture us on trade inefficiencies? I came here, she corrected, because you invited me to explain why humans do not behave the way you expect. And the explanation is? We prepare, she said. Excessively. She gestured, and the screens shifted once more. Simulations bloomed across the air, branching endlessly like living organisms. Outcomes stacked atop probabilities. Failure states nested within success states. Humans rehearse arguments the way you rehearse battles, she continued. By the time we speak, the conflict has already happened 1,000 times. We just choose which version we're comfortable living with. A crystalline noble chimed, its voice resonant and cool. If this is a threat, it is poorly delivered. She turned toward it, nodding politely. If this were a threat, you would not be hearing it in a room full of witnesses. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop, though no system reported a change. The king laughed, carefully now. You rely too much on implication, General. Empires are built on action. Yes, she said. And they collapse on assumptions. One of the ancient tacticians finally spoke, its voice like wind through stone. Why show us this? The general met its gaze with something close to respect. Because humans believe strongly in informed consent. The king's crown flared, irritation breaking through his composure. You speak as if you are doing us a favor. In a way, she said, I am. That drew a sharp hiss from the warlords. The merchants went still. The observers watched. You claim humans do not fear war, the king said. Yet you have brought none. She inclined her head. We don't bring weapons to meetings unless we expect to use them. And do you? He pressed. She paused, just long enough to let the question breathe. That depends on how this conversation ends. The screens dimmed slightly, then brightened again, highlighting specific nodes along the Empire's vast infrastructure. The names meant nothing to most of the court, but the merchants recognized them instantly. So did the tacticians. These, the general said, are your redundancies. You are very proud of them. You believe they make you resilient. The king narrowed his eyes. They do. They make you predictable, she replied. Redundancy tells us what you cannot afford to lose. A low hum filled the chamber as data streams updated in real time. Minor delays. Small discrepancies. Nothing catastrophic. Yet, the general clasped her hands behind her back again, posture relaxed, as if discussing weather patterns rather than imperial survival. Humans have a habit, she said conversationally. When we're told something is impossible, we ask how expensive it would be to make it inconvenient. The king rose from his throne. He was taller than her by every measurable standard, his presence overwhelming, his authority absolute. You tread dangerously close to provocation. She did not step back. Danger is contextual. For a heartbeat, it seemed he might order her seized. Several guards shifted, weapons humming softly. The general noticed them, catalogued their positions, then dismissed them from her mind. You think yourselves apex predators, the king said, voice cold now. No, she said quietly. We think ourselves accountants. That earned a few startled reactions. Even the ancient tactician tilted its head. War, she continued, is a ledger. Losses on one side. Gains on the other. Humans learned early that the best wars are the ones where the other side runs out of options before we run out of patience. The king stared at her, something like doubt flickering beneath his fury. And what options do you believe we are running out of? She glanced at the screens, then back at him. The ones you didn't realize you were already spending. An alarm chimed again, sharper this time. A report flashed briefly before being suppressed. The merchants whispered frantically among themselves. The general straightened, smoothing an invisible crease in her sleeve. I don't expect you to believe me today, she said. Humans rarely do, either. Then why speak at all? The king demanded. Her expression softened, just a fraction. Because once this moves past words, there won't be another chance to misunderstand us. The court felt smaller suddenly, as if the walls had drawn in. The laughter that once defined it seemed like a distant memory, something reckless and naive. The general met the king's gaze one last time, her voice steady, almost kind. This is the part where humans are still smiling, she said. After this, we tend to get very quiet. The first sign that something was wrong came not from the alarms, nor from the sudden shift in the ambient lighting, but from the silence that settled too quickly. An unnatural, brittle stillness that felt like a held breath stretched past comfort. The court had grown accustomed to stillness since the human general began speaking, but this was different. This silence had weight, gravity, intent. It pressed down, not from the human, but from the systems that sustained the empire, as though the machinery of their power hesitated before revealing news no one wished to hear. A small holographic display flickered near the merchant's row, showing the faintest tremor of distortion before correcting itself. One of the merchant princes leaned forward, tapping a crystalline edge against its console, trying to coax clarity out of the glitch. It failed. The distortion repeated, slower this time, like a heart missing a beat. Then the projection vanished entirely. "That is not possible," the prince muttered, though no one heard it clearly. It sounded like denial more than analysis. Other displays began to flicker. Subtle at first, barely perceptible shivers along the edges of data windows, supply graphs freezing mid-update, timelines stuttering. The Empire's digital heartbeat faltered. The human general stood in the center of it all, posture unchanged, hands loose behind her back. She watched the unfolding confusion not with triumph or cruelty, but with something quieter and far more unsettling: recognition. She had seen this pattern before many times. Not in empires, but in organizations, institutions, systems built on the belief that their own momentum justified their survival. A reptilian warlord noticed the failing projections and snarled, "Is this your doing, human?" She did not answer immediately. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, looking at the monitors as though evaluating a familiar equation. "No," she said at last. "This is your doing. I'm merely observing the consequences." "The systems are malfunctioning," an insectoid commander snapped, its antennae flaring in agitation. "Explain yourself." "I already did," the general replied. "You simply assumed the explanation was metaphorical." A harsh alarm blared, louder than before, echoing through the chamber with a shrill urgency that startled even the seasoned warriors. A new hologram burst into view, red, fractured, struggling to stabilize. Security glyphs circled its edges. "Outer route cluster Sigma offline," intoned an automated voice. "Cause: systemic interruption. Estimated restoration: undetermined." "Impossible!" the king growled, rising fully from his throne now. His crown glowed with volatile light, its metal branches twitching like agitated nerves. "That cluster is protected by triple redundancy." The general looked up, meeting his gaze with unsettling calm. "Yes. Redundancy. The first thing humans study when determining which systems support everything else." "You," the king began, but another alarm cut him off. "Communications hub Keelan, 4 unresponsive. Long-range transmissions disrupted. Cause: interference unknown." The court erupted into fearful chattering. The merchants, normally so composed, vibrated with visible panic as profit margins bled from their imaginations. Warlords shouted over one another, demanding explanations, demanding blame. Only the ancient observers remained still, their centuries of memory stirring with echoes of previous warnings unheeded. The general took a step forward. Just one. It softened the chaos instantly, though no one could say why. Something about her presence had shifted. She no longer looked like a visitor or a representative. She looked like a catalyst. "You misunderstand what is happening," she said, voice clear, carrying effortlessly over the noise. "This is not an attack." "That is exactly what it is." The king roared. "Our systems are falling." "No," she said gently. "Your illusions are." A projection near her flickered on its own, revealing a map of the empire. Thousands of worlds connected by luminous threads. As the court watched, several threads dimmed, then disappeared entirely. Supply networks buckled inward. Trade routes lost cohesion. Communications lagged like nerves severed from the spine. "We have faced worse," the reptilian warlord insisted, though its armor rattled with barely restrained fear. "We have survived plagues, insurgencies, cosmic storms." "And each time," the general said, "you assumed your survival meant your structure was sound. Humans made the same mistake once. Many times. But we learned. We learned to read the cracks before the building falls." Another alarm screamed. "Defense grid Helios, 9 entering sleep mode. Unauthorized shutdown. Cause: internal override." The court's panic sharpened into desperation. "Human!" a crystalline noble cried, its tone vibrating with dread. "How did you do this?" She exhaled softly, as though the explanation bored her. "I didn't." Then she lifted a single finger toward the hologram. "You did." The king slammed a clawed hand against his throne. "Explain." "You centralized everything," she replied. "Supply, defense, communication. Even your redundancies depend on each other. You created a perfect system, perfectly balanced, perfectly interconnected, perfectly vulnerable." One of the ancient tacticians whispered, "A single shift in the wrong place collapses the whole." She nodded. "Humans have a phrase, 'Don't put all your eggs in one basket.' You built a basket with your name engraved on it, and placed your entire civilization inside." "You speak as though you have done something similar," the king hissed. "We used to," she admitted. "Then we stopped celebrating our victories long enough to notice the lessons in our failures." More projections died. The lighting dimmed, flickering like a heartbeat skipping beats. Guards rushed to the edges of the chamber, barking orders into silent comms. Doors refused to respond to coded commands. "This cannot be natural," the king snarled. "This is sabotage, human sabotage." The general frowned slightly, as though mildly offended. "You give us too much credit. Humans are not magicians. We don't conjure collapse. We simply don't interrupt it when it is already happening." The merchant's prince roll clicked its mandibles frantically. "But why now? Why during this meeting?" "Because you invited me," she answered. "And you gathered every decision-maker you trust into one room. A rare opportunity." "You are threatening us," another warlord spat. "No," she said. "I'm observing you." The panic rose until even the ancient observers glowed with shifting warning colors. The king glared at the failing projections, fighting to maintain composure as the empire he believed eternal flickered before his eyes. "What do you want, human?" he demanded. She looked at him with an expression that was almost tender, almost. "I want you to understand something humans learned the hard way. That power is not measured by how loudly you dominate, but by how quietly you endure." A fresh alert pulsed crimson across every display. Central Administrative Nexus offline. Emergency Authority Protocols engaged. Routing non-functional. Manual override required. The king's composure finally cracked. "That is our command center." "Was," the general corrected softly. "Now it's data storage." "You dare." She raised a hand, stopping him with a gesture so calm it felt like an insult. "This demonstration is not about daring. It is about perspective." The ancient tactician regarded her with slow respect. "You knew this meeting would coincide with the system checks." "Of course," she said. "You announced them publicly months ago." Somewhere in the chamber, a merchant fainted. "You have not answered the question," the king growled. "How did you cause this?" "I didn't introduce flaws," she said. "I revealed them. Humans didn't cut your routes. Humans didn't shut down your grids. Humans didn't override your systems. We only nudged." "Nudged?" the crystalline noble echoed, voice trembling. She nodded. "A few altered timing sequences here. A few reprioritized maintenance commands there. A slight increase in data load on a single overburdened node. That sort of thing." "You collapsed an empire," the warlord shouted. "With inconveniences?" "Humans," she said, "are very good at inconveniences." The king's crown dimmed with rage. "This is war." "No," she said. "This is demonstration." A final alarm sounded. Deep, resonant, undeniable. Empire-wide synchronization failure. Reboot required. Estimated downtime, variable. Every projection died at once. Darkness consumed the chamber for a single breath, long enough to feel like an ending. Then auxiliary lights flickered on. The court stared at her. Some horrified, some trembling, some finally understanding. She stepped forward, her voice low, carrying a weight that made even the king hesitate. "You keep asking what humans fear," she said. We fear only one thing, ignoring the obvious until it destroys us. Her gaze swept the chamber. You have ignored the obvious for centuries. The king's voice cracked with something deeper than anger, something closer to fear. What obvious truth? That empires fall, she said softly, long before they realize they are falling. The chamber felt colder now, as if some tether to certainty had been severed. And what happens now? The king demanded. She tilted her head, considering him with frightening sincerity. Now? Now you decide how loudly you wish to collapse, or how quietly you wish to survive. The ancient tactician closed its eyes, shivering with old memory. And humanity? What role do you play? She smiled gently, almost sadly. We observe. We calculate. And if necessary. Her eyes hardened, steel beneath velvet. We accelerate the inevitable. A trembling hush fell. Even the air felt thinner. The king stepped forward, towering over her, though for the first time it did not feel like dominance. It felt like desperation masked as authority. You said this is demonstration, he whispered. Is it finished? She looked up at him, eyes calm, unblinking. No, she said. This was only the part you could see. And before anyone could speak, a new sound rose, quiet at first, distant, like the echo of something waking far beneath the floor. A sound that did not belong to the empire. A sound that did not come from the court. A sound that every species recognized instinctively, though none had ever heard it directed at them. A human fleet dropping out of void space. The court froze. The general's expression softened again, almost compassionate. Now, she murmured, you'll see the part we don't announce. The sound of the arriving fleet did not resemble thunder or machinery or any familiar force of nature. It was quieter than all of those, a low harmonic tremor that resonated not in the ears but in the bones. It was the vibration of something vast displacing space itself, a pressure that made the court feel suddenly smaller, brittle, fragile. The Empire's greatest hall, built to withstand bombardment, shielded by layers of defenses, fortified with technologies stolen from extinct worlds, seemed to hold its breath, as though acknowledging the arrival of a predator it had not accounted for. The king stared upward, eyes wide, crown flickering as if unsure which emotion it should display. You brought a fleet, he whispered, not in anger this time, but in disbelief. The human general did not turn her gaze toward the ceiling, or toward the holograms struggling to reboot. She kept her eyes on him, as if he were the only figure in the room. We brought clarity, she corrected softly. The fleet is simply the punctuation. How many? One of the merchants squeaked, voice cracking under strain. Enough, she said. The court shifted as though caught between fleeing and collapsing. The warlords rose to their feet, their armor clattering like mismatched chords. The tacticians murmured in frantic undertones. Even the ancient observers seemed unsettled, their usual serenity cracking along old scars of memory. A new sound joined the tremor, a slow, rhythmic pulse. A signal. A heartbeat. The human fleet broadcasting its presence in regular intervals, not as a threat, but as a reminder. You said this wasn't war, the king said, struggling to steady his voice. Yet you arrive with weapons. They're not aimed at you, she replied. Not yet. That word, yet, spread through the chamber like cold wine through a graveyard. The king's eyes narrowed. What is your true intent, General? To give you a choice, she said. A choice? The crystalline noble's voice cracked into a dozen mirrored tones. You cripple our networks, disable our defenses, paralyze our routes, summon a fleet, and speak of choices? Yes, she answered. Because everything up to now has been reversible. Silence again. Sharp. Hungry. The king stepped closer, his massive frame casting a shadow across her boots. If you wished to destroy us, you would have done so already. That is correct. Then what restrains you? Her expression shifted. Barely, but enough for every species present to sense the change. Something like sorrow touched her eyes, mingled with a simmering fury too deep to rise to the surface. The past restrains us, she said. The part where humanity once believed strength meant domination. The part where we learn domination always leads to annihilation, usually of the innocent first. A flicker of discomfort crossed the faces of several nobles. Innocent was not a word the Empire used often. The king tilted his head. You imply we harmed your worlds. We have not touched Earth. No, she agreed. You haven't. You targeted colonies, outposts, civilian transports in disputed space. You expected Earth to fear war because you targeted those who could not fight back. A tremor of recognition rippled through the chamber as old reports, dismissed as accidents or unfortunate encounters, resurfaced in collective memory. You caused the war, she said. The moment you mistook our patience for cowardice. The king bared his teeth. We do not apologize for asserting authority. No, she replied. You apologize when you realize you no longer have authority. Alarms crackled back to life sporadically as systems attempted partial recovery, but none of them displayed useful data. The Empire was effectively blind, and the fleet above them was impossibly visible, if not through screens, then through the gravity that bent the chamber's air. The king's voice lowered, heavy with grudging curiosity. Why warn us at all? Why speak of choices? Why not simply strike? Her answer came without hesitation. Because humans prefer survival to spectacle. Because destruction proves nothing. And because someone in this chamber might decide that living is more valuable than ruling. A crystalline noble collapsed to its knees, overwhelmed. A warlord drew a weapon, only to receive no response from its disabled targeting system. The ancient tactician inhaled, its breath trembling with ancient dread. We cannot negotiate under threat, the king said, though his voice lacked conviction. We are not negotiating, she replied. We are clarifying. He snarled. Clarify then. She stepped closer, her boots echoing softly across the polished floor. The sound was steady, unhurried, as though she were approaching an old friend rather than a monarch who believed himself invincible. You built an empire on fear, she said, her voice low and precise. Humans built civilizations on consequences. You strike to intimidate. We strike to end patterns. And when we choose to act, we do so only after we've exhausted every peaceful option. You call this peaceful? He demanded, gesturing at the dying projections. Yes, she said. Because no lives have been lost. Yet. The warlords who had been ready to pounce faltered. The merchants stilled completely. The ancient observers dimmed their lights in a gesture of grim acknowledgement. If this was the peaceful phase, the alternative must have been something unspeakably worse. The king towered over her, but his shadow no longer intimidated. It trembled faintly. What do you expect me to do? He asked, each word pulled from him like stone from the earth. I expect you to choose, she answered. Between what? Between collapse and transformation. The word transformation struck the court like a physical blow. Empires transformed only when forced. And nothing forced an empire without shattering it first. But she continued, her tone softer now, almost gentle. You have the opportunity to survive this. Not as you are, but as something wiser. Something smaller perhaps, but more stable. Submission, a warlord spat. Correction, she replied. Not submission. Adaptation. The king's gaze darkened. And if we refuse? She met his eyes without flinching. Then the collapse you are experiencing now becomes permanent. And the fleet above us completes what the infrastructure has begun. The pulse from the human ships deepened, becoming a resonant hum that settled into the marrow of every creature in the court. The sound was patient. It was not a roar. It was a promise. The king's breath hitched. You would destroy us. No, she said. We would stop you from destroying others. A shiver ran across the chamber. It was not fear of annihilation. Empire species rarely feared death. It was the fear of inevitability, of realizing that everything they believed controlled their fate had already slipped beyond reach. The general took another step closer, until she stood at the base of the king's throne. She did not bow. She simply looked up at him, her expression not triumphant but profoundly weary. Humans don't start wars, she said. We finish them. Something inside the king cracked then. Not visibly, not audibly, but in the way his posture shifted, in the way his crown dimmed to a defeated glow. He understood that the empire he ruled was no longer the empire that existed. What assurance do we have, he whispered, that your fleet will not fire even if we yield? She did not smile, but warmth touched her voice. Because humans don't waste ammunition on surrender. The chamber exhaled as one, a long, ragged breath. The king lowered his head, the gesture slow, trembling, monumental. What must I do? Begin by stopping, she said. Stop expanding. Stop terrorizing. Stop pretending fear is loyalty. Once you stop, we will help you rebuild what remains. Help? He echoed, stunned. Help, she repeated. Because survival is more useful than victory. He looked at her for a long time, searching for deceit. He found none. At last, he spoke. And the fleet? She stepped back, giving him space to rise. The fleet waits. He hesitated, then straightened to his full height. Then I will speak the words required. Good, she said softly. Because humanity came here to listen. He turned toward the court, broken, shaken, terrified, and drew a breath to reshape centuries of tyranny. But before he could speak, the chamber's lights flickered violently. A new signal appeared. Not human. Not imperial. Something else. Something approaching fast. The general's eyes narrowed, her calm cracking for the very first time. The king froze. What is that? She stared at the rising signal, her voice barely above a whisper. Something, she said, neither of us planned for.